So it's the Wednesday after tour down under, and tradition has it that we get a visitor from overseas who comes into the office during his time in Australia. Same's going to happen again in 2017, and it's with much pleasure that I introduce Simon Mottram to the latest in the Talking Cycling series. We're caught up on Willunga Hill. I can show you a little blurb about that, but we'll see if we can put him in front of the camera in the studio as well. He's the owner of Rapha, a fascinating guy. He's got a unique take on the world of cycling, and it's definitely worth having a chat with him and just getting his views on the progression of our sport. So without further ado, here's Simon Mottram. I hope you enjoy the interview. It's a tradition for you to come to Australia in January. We spoke about it on Willunga Hill the other day. So I understand you don't mind the heat for a couple of days a year?
I don't mind the heat. I've got sunburnt knees at the moment though, so it's a little bit painful. Even crossing my legs is quite painful.
Okay.
But no, I don't mind it at all. I love the heat.
You love the heat. You'd love to travel the world, I would say.
I have to. I mean, 75% of our sales are outside the UK, so I have to travel all the time. Well, I try not to travel all the time. I've got a family, so I can't. But if I was unmarried, I would probably travel every week. There's plenty of reason to do it. The cycling world's a big world, and even though the UK is this massive booming place, the rest of the markets around the world still need to be seen. So why not come to Australia in January? Don't come in June, July, I would say.
Exactly. There's other things to do then. Is it an endless summer for you then?
Ideally. Yeah.
Endless Summer is a good concept because it's a surfing film, and a lot of, let's say, modern day cycling apparel has certain connection with surf culture insofar that surf culture was always existent, and then it became trendy, and then Billabong and Quicksilver and the like really took off.
Yeah.
Perhaps the same has applied to Rapha in the cycling sphere. Would you agree with that?
That's a good way of putting it. We talk about surfing quite a bit actually. The difference between those brands and what's happening in cycling is that they got to be multi-billion-dollar brands, not selling bikes that cost thousands of dollars, but selling t-shirts and board shorts and sunglasses and what have you.
And a lifestyle ideal.
Yeah, so the whole idea of the endless summer and the perfect wave, which, you know, I get those and they're very aspirational, and I love that, but they're kind of irrelevant to most of us, most of our lives. They're just aspirations. To have built multi-billion-dollar businesses based on something as simple as that, I think is really impressive. And then you look at cycling and you think about all the things that cycling's got. You know, it's got the aspirational stuff, it's got the history, it's got the culture and the adventure, it's got social side, but it's also something you do every day. It's totally relevant and totally aspirational. So why can't the cycling industry be way bigger than that? I think it can. Yeah.
What's holding it back?
I think it talks to itself too much. I think there's very little holding it back in terms of the world. I think everything is heading in its direction. I think the biggest challenge cycling has is the cycling industry and, dare I say, governing bodies and the sport at the top of the pyramid, which is broken. That's holding it back. So the shop window's no good, and needs to be rebuilt. But I think actually in terms of general sort of take up of cycling, it's all happening. It's happening around us. We're just not helping as an industry.
But the Rapha CC example is one that sort of goes against trend, and it's clearly popular. Tell us a little bit about that initiative and what the driving force behind it all is.
So Rapha was always a bit of a club, I suppose, and I always wanted it to be for people who cared about cycling. You know, that was the idea. So starting with .cc as a URL was pretty revolutionary, and it was only because .com was already taken, so I couldn't buy it. I tried.
Okay.
And when I couldn't buy it, I thought, well, actually, I can probably find that. I know where the cyclists live. You know, I know that community because I'm part of it. So if it's about those people, then why not use .cc? Because all our clubs in the old days used to be called Harlesden CC or Yeovil CC or whatever in the UK. So I put it in, and I think my board thought I was a bit crazy and was very dubious, but it took off, and because we weren't trying to talk to everybody in the world, we were trying to talk to the people who vaguely knew what we were talking about. And so it started as .cc, which is club. Then it was natural to do a sort of clubhouse at some point, or a cycle club as we called them then, a physical place. And once we had a few of those, it just felt like a natural development to actually have a formalised club as part of it. And we don't want the thing to be super exclusive. And I think actually when you see the RCC on the road or see us hanging out, everyone's very open and generous and normal people. So the idea is that it's a very sort of open-looking club, but it does cost to join, and it is a membership organisation.
And people can Google it and find out the benefits. I don't need to spruik it here.
You don't, but you could do.
No. We don't have, just for the record, we have no commercial accord.
Spending no money.
You spend no money, but you make some money. Are you making yourself rich out of it? Have you bought an island yet?
No, I don't have an island. I have a house in northwest London, very near the North Circular. So
okay.
No, not yet. No, but we're doing well.
Okay.
Yeah, cycling's doing well. We're doing really quite well, and the club is definitely a key part of that now. 10,000 members.
Yeah.
Who are our strongest supporters, I suppose.
Okay. 2 years ago we spoke, and you basically alluded that the direction you would take was travel. Is that on the back burner, or it continues?
No, it continues.
Yeah.
I mean, travel's a difficult business. It's very hard to execute. To put on any experience is quite difficult. You know, we do it with our clubhouses every day. It's difficult, but it's the most rewarding thing. So, for me, the satisfaction of taking somebody on a trip, and the experience they have and the memories they create and those moments are worth so much more than a piece of polyester or merino wool. They cost more, but they're also more difficult to actually put on. Yeah. So we're working away at it. We're doing quite well. We'll do about 50 trips this year.
Wow.
It's just about breaks even, which is quite hard in travel if you ask anybody in travel. And even though it's only a few % of our overall turnover, conceptually it's right at the heart of what we do, because that's the experience you want to be on. Even if you're sitting in an office or riding around the park, ideally you're in the Pyrenees or the Dolomites or somewhere.
I spoke with someone in New Zealand in November who'd just gotten back from the Utah experience.
Oh yeah.
And she had a great time, but she also explained some of the challenges. In that there was a lot of climbing and big distances and consistent every day. Are you trying to not just challenge but destroy the people participating?
No, it's a good point actually, because you can make these things sufferfest, can't you?
Yeah.
And we have the hardest ones we do, the Songkhol Challenge, which is 100 cols in 10 days. Ooh. Yeah, that is there to really be overcome, or survived, I suppose. But most of our trips aren't about survival. Most of our trips are about digging deep, but still getting there. There has to be an element of application to the thing. We all know that riding a bike is most satisfying when you've really applied yourself and gone hard. And if you don't go deep and suffer a bit, you don't get any of the satisfaction. So there has to be some of that, but we don't want the whole thing to be for headbangers. It's for regular people, and we want to give them that experience. So that's the challenge, making it just hard enough but not too hard for a variety of different people is really quite challenging. And if they're people who spent a few $1,000s and they're used to getting their own way in their corporate life or whatever, and then you've got them halfway up a mountain and they're in tears, that's a difficult situation that we want to try and avoid.
Yeah, I was just imagining that same image. Someone either crying or celebrating, it's not far between the two.
No. But if you get it right, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And actually, more often than not, at the end of the trip, people have done it, and they've gone through their own personal challenge at some point. Yeah. But it's never usually the same point. It'll always be a different day, and at the end of it, they've all made it, and that's the best thing.
Yeah, satisfaction comes in many forms. How do you find your satisfaction on the bike?
well, it's easy, and just by I can get satisfaction from the shortest ride or the longest ride. You know, I hate the expression junk miles.
Right.
You know, for me, every mile on a bike, I get satisfaction. So it's not a training thing. It's embracing the experience. So for me, it's the perfect counterpoint to everything else in my life. My phone's off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm generally with friends. If I'm not with friends, I'm somewhere on my own, but lost in my thoughts. That's all satisfying in itself.
Mm.
Then if you can go a bit further and you can go out and go somewhere amazing, then even better. But no, I'm lucky. I ride all over the world, but I enjoy just as much the rides around North London with my friends and getting muddy on cyclocross bikes. And yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, yeah. When will Rapha tackle the mountain bike market?
For me, never.
So you enjoy cycling in all its guises, but you don't need to.
I think you have to be clear about who you are as a brand, and I think road cycling has a different culture to mountain biking, even though some cross-country mountain biking is not very different to me doing my cross rides, to be honest, but there are subtle cultural differences, and we have to draw the line. So even though our product is quite good for lots of cross-country mountain biking and will happily sell to mountain bikers, we're not about that. We're about road cycling.
What will become of Rapha? I mean, in relative terms, it's only a very young company.
The whole proposition, all we're trying to do is to show people what we were just talking about, that fulfilling, transformational experience you get from riding a road bike. We want to get as many people as possible to enjoy that for as long as possible, and to take people on a journey from starting out through to trying racing or doing some amazing randonnée or some amazing songcall or whatever, and all points in between. I mean, we have a big ambition, and to get more people doing that, because part of me loves the fact that it's my little world and I know people in that world, and I can make money in that place and it's just for me.
Yeah.
But actually it's too good. It's too good to just keep it for us geeks who love it. And I think we all need help to sort of reach more people and break down the barriers and make it easier for people to pick it up. So that for Rapha, I want it to be that whole spectrum. So we need to get deeper into racing at the top end and the hard end, but we also need to be much more helpful to people who are starting out. And that probably involves different price points. It probably involves more service and more experiences as well as more products. Lots of things to do.
Yeah. I've seen you about to board a helicopter at the Tour de France with Yann Lemonnier, and
once.
but it was the one time I saw.
What a day that was!
And we've seen you as supplying Team Sky with so much product that it seems almost uncountable.
Yeah.
And we've seen you have major dalliances with pro cycling, but we also understand that the model of pro cycling is, I'm going to say it's broken. It's rank. It doesn't really. It's dependent on benefactors, and there are opportunities for sponsors to get a return and some satisfaction. But if it keeps going under the current model, it's got limited lifespan, hasn't it? What would you do what was the first thing you'd do to change it if you were in command?
If I was Mr. ASO.
Yes, let's say ASO.
For example.
It's good to say ASO rather than UCI, because there is one company that really dominates the
Totally,
sport.
yeah. UCI plays an important role, but they can't run the sport. They can't make it the biggest thing in the world, which is what we want it to be. That needs somebody with a bit more oomph. If I was Mr. ASO, the first thing I would do is change the calendar.
Okay.
Last year, I'm obsessed by the sport, and I've watched it for many years, and I watch it from Tour Down Under through to all the cyclocross season, so all the time. But around October last year, for the first time in 30 years, I started to get a bit bored. I started to look at it and go, so what race is it this week?
Yeah.
And it's incomprehensible. There's no overall ranking system that makes sense. There's no competition that people can understand. It bamboozles people, even within the sport.
Yeah.
So imagine if you're a 15-year-old kid thinking this is really interesting, I wonder what this is all about. I mean, and turning on your TV or turning up a race and, oh yeah, well that top racer isn't here because this is actually more of a classics race, so it's more for this kind of rider, and actually that's a different series completely, and the prize money is different, and it's for teams, but then they wear yellow jerseys, and I mean I love the complexity because I'm in it, but it's not helpful. So I simplify the calendar massively, and make it. To me, the whole thing is a human sport. It's all about bringing out the individual and the character, and having individuals racing against each other. And teams are important, but they're not the answer either. So I'd like to have a different calendar that really celebrates man-to-man kind of or woman-to-woman competition.
Yeah, it's interesting when the announcement about Qatar pulling out and no longer being part of the calendar was made. I felt a sense of sadness, but there was a bit of relief because it is such a crowded calendar, like you say, and to maintain enthusiasm from January through to November it's a big ask of any sports fan.
Yeah, I don't believe that a drag race in the desert with teams of people wearing matching skin suits in 45-degree heat for some kind of trophy that doesn't really make any sense. I don't see how that's helping the sport in the slightest. So no. I shed no tear when that went.
Well, I just think that if you look at the models of successful sports, let's say F1, for all its fault, it does capture the imagination of a very enthusiastic crowd, and they do so by having limited number of athletes, limited number of competition, and exploiting both of those. And what's odd about cycling is that rather than Formula One where there's 30 stars, there's 1,500 potential stars in cycling, and now the teams they're anti-PR because they're trying to turn their commodities, their Richie Ports or the spokesman of the team, into unaccessible people. The beauty of cycling is that it had been so tangible, so touchable, so available, and now they're being shunted into team buses and away from the masses. And
well, it's nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so short-sighted.
Yeah.
If I had a team, we used to own a team, I suppose, Rapha Condor with Condor,
yeah.
But it was much smaller. There wasn't much TV around our team, I have to say. But if I was one of those team principals, the whole maximising your team's value and your rider's value is about them having a reputation and a relationship with the fan. It's not about buses and corporate spiel or even winning races. Frankly, crossing the line with your arms in the air to me is worth, in terms of sort of engagement, is worth very little.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas an amazing conversation with a journalist or conversation with a fan is worth millions. So I don't understand why they don't do it. And it's odd that Peter Sagan, who I think is pretty good, and he's obviously massively talented and he's quite a cool guy. But isn't it sad that he's the exception that proves a rule?
Yeah.
It takes one slightly crazy guy who pulls wheelies, and suddenly he's the most exciting property in cycling. That says a lot about cycling.
Yeah, it's odd. You did have a halcyon time with Sky, for example. Like with the let's use Froome as an example because he is a really good ambassador for the sport. I love speaking with him. He's very genuine. He is approachable, even when he's got a cold and is about to win the Tour de France. You can still get a sentence with him, and it's quite refreshing, in fact. And it definitely prepared Rapha very well for what was yet to come.
Yeah, it did.
What goes through your mind or your heart, perhaps, when you see all of the negativity that's come in the last couple of months because of TVs and things that happened before your time?
Yeah, no doubt. I don't think our time was particularly special in terms of those things going on or not going on. It feels like there's a long continuum of these things happening. So I wouldn't be surprised if I woke up tomorrow and heard there was another scandal. It just happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you can expect it, but when it happens, do you squirm? Do you just sort of nod along? When people want a reaction, do you give them one, or evidently not, because you know, I guess I'm asking for a reaction. And
I've been around as
is,
long as you, and you know, it's kind of you're never surprised, really, are you? I don't squirm because it's just what it is, and you know, TUEs is at one end of a spectrum. There's a lot of worse stuff, I'm sure, that's still out there, and there certainly has been out there. I feel sorry for Dave Brailsford. I think he's a good guy, and I think he's been doing the right thing, and he's had a mammoth impact on the sport in the UK, certainly. And to be sort of on the back foot like the way he isn't where he normally is, and I think that's difficult to watch, and feel sorry for him. But I think it's symptomatic of what they're trying to do. You know, they're trying to compete in a fairly badly regulated, slightly dirty sport, and they're trying to get as close to the line as possible and not cross it. That's an impossible game, isn't it? You know, and not that you're going to cross it, but you're going to get so close that you lose all sorts of credibility, I think. And I think he's been dancing around that for a long time and doing his best and doing really well. But that would be my view of it without him telling me. But
what can the media do to enhance what's become of our funny little pastime?
A huge amount would be the answer. When we started out, we had little flyers that we used to go to bike rides, not races, just bike rides. So London to Brighton bike ride, and we'd hand out these little flyers just to try and get the brand out there. So this is 2004, and on these little flyers, it would have a nice photograph on one side. On the other side, it would say, "Demand more from cycling clothing." It had a really crappy line, so I'm not a copywriter, but "demand more from cycling clothing" was kind of what we were saying. You're going to spend 7 hours in this jersey. It should at least have a zip that doesn't catch, or you know, give you a cut neck, or the pocket should at least be in the right place, and the fabric. It'd be great if it worked. I now feel that about the media, actually. Demand more from cycling media, because the sport itself is broken, but the way we cover it, the way we tell stories about it, the way that's distributed, I just think it's incredibly first base. It's incredibly low rent. And there just seems to be a lack of imagination and a lack of ambition about what cycling media should be. And so I end up watching the same footage of the same camera angles of the same races with the same commentators, and talking about TV rather than print, obviously. But it's terrible for somebody who's on the inside of the sport, because it doesn't give me anything new. It doesn't get to those characters and those personalities we were talking about. But secondly, if you're outside of it, apart from the Tour de France, which looks beautiful, and you know, some of the landscapes look great, why would you be interested? You know, where's the human drama? Compare it with you know, things like Vice TV, and how they, for a certain demographic, they are completely relevant. They make the world relevant to that demographic. How's cycling making itself relevant to people's lives? You know, it's not pictures of cornfields and, you know.
If I see another motorcycle pan shot down to the speedometer of the motorcycle, I squealed when it was on the big screen at Tour Down Under. I just was like, everyone revolt, please close your eyes, don't watch this, it's horrendous. There's so much potential that's been ignored. And even just watching a heart rate at the bottom of the screen, it's tears, it's painful.
Totally. So why is that? I mean, I'm somebody who doesn't give a damn about data in my own cycling. I don't have a speedo or anything. But I know that for most cyclists, you know, I'm a weird exception. Most cyclists, that's a really relevant thing. How hard can it be to have all that data on the screen all the time, and all sorts of patterns of the data and analysis of the data?
Look at what's become of cricket. Like I can be blasé about cricket and say that I'm not interested in it anymore, but I can turn on a 2020 and just be like, oh my God, look at this. They've innovated it so much, flashing stumps and God knows what. Everyone can tell me more about it than I can say about it. But it's immense. And cricket is stubborn and old school, and they've absolutely reinvented the sport over the years. And cycling ought to take a look at itself and consider that model.
So I don't know why that hasn't happened. So having Velon arguing for TV cameras on bikes and stuff, it's such a minor, tiny step that still hasn't really been done properly.
Well, it's a flawed model when you have Velon owned by Shift Media, and Shift Media then therefore is its own media entity while pretending to be a PR company. You know, I have to make my concessions along the way as a publisher of a cycling magazine and work with other entities. But the Velon model doesn't seem to be getting any traction anywhere.
No.
It doesn't. The data exists, and yet we see for the whole of the opening round of the World Tour in 2017, I don't recall seeing any footage from one bike. I don't know. I remember seeing a little bit of data from someone from the Uni SA team, but that was heart rate alone. And
but also, why can't you have the shot of the face of the rider? I'd like to see Richie Porte's face the whole day.
right.
You know, how hard would that be to have a picture of his face?
Mm.
So you can see, you can hear what he's saying. You can, I mean, he may not like that. Richie would probably get upset about that, but these things are all possible.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem, and it may not be to do with this particular point we're talking about, but part of the problem is that the sport's still run by ex-racers,
Yeah.
and their lens of why people should, their understanding of why people should like cycling is from their own experience. Obviously, that's true for all of us.
Mm.
But I don't think that's the answer. You know, the way of connecting, most riders are never going to race. They don't have time. They actually probably don't even want to. They enjoy watching it.
Mm.
And it can add value to their cycling life by showing them a dramatic form of what they do.
Mm.
They don't have to be racers to be able to appreciate it.
Mm.
But most people who run teams, most people in the media, the pinnacle of their experience is to be a crit racer or to be a racer.
Yeah.
The pinnacle of their experience should be as communicators or as people who understand what it's like to ride a bike, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that that's helped us, is that we're not from that world. You know, we come from an enthusiast point of view,
Yeah.
and we love the sport, but we'd rather tell people about it than, you know, encourage people to ride crits. But
It doesn't take much to engage. I'll give you a good example. I was sure that I would never take to the Wahoo kicker. I was adamant that I wasn't going to be part of the virtual world. And then my 11-year-old started using it, and his 6-year-old brother became, you know, absolutely engaged by the data. So he was always yelling at him to lift his power or to go harder on the hills, or to even warning him that a hill was coming up. And so all of that stuff is there on Zwift for them to see.
yeah,
And it took about a week, and then I succumbed.
Had a go.
And then within that week, I can understand it, and that's a whole community of people that has been introduced to cycling. They might have fear of being on the streets, and so therefore they're riding their bike and getting the fitness benefits, but they're also getting that engagement from the data that's provided, and that therefore turns them into much more educated viewers. So anyway, that's my little anecdote of how I think the world could sort of make cycling a little bit more engaging, just by providing the data and just saying, sorry, there's no secrets anymore. We've learned what the fault of secrets in cycling can lead to.
yeah,
So let's just throw it all out there.
yeah.
And we can estimate that Richie's putting out 450 watts, or we can, and so let's just put the data out there, and
Yeah.
when we see it on the screen, we can all go, ooh, like Peppa Pig.
And some of it can come from the riders themselves. You know,
Right.
if you're a competitive racer, you may not be the best in the world, but you're up there. You could actually say to your team, "This is what I'm doing. You know, I'm going to have my own channel. I'm going to be doing this, that, and the other," and you know, get it written into your contract. And you can do that if you want to. If you want to have a life, certainly if you want to have a career beyond your competitive cycling life, you've kind of got to do it. So I think some people will step up and start doing it. You see some, you know, Lockie Mottram, for example, who does stuff outside of the racing, and it doesn't conflict at all. It actually makes his racing experience as a fan, it makes it much more interesting. Because here's the guy I last saw in a t-shirt riding across the desert, and there he is on Willunga. I think that's brilliant. So I think riders can take it into their own hands, and actually riders, managers and agents should be telling them to do that, I think.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
I think so. I mean, what we're talking is bigger picture stuff, and someone actually has to facilitate it and make it happen. And there is technology or hindrances or hurdles, but they can be jumped over.
There's no hurdle to a pro rider reaching an audience.
No.
Yeah, it's easier than it's ever been. Yeah, it's infinitesimally easier than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, they just got to have something to say. So,
Yeah.
yeah, please, can you riders, can you have something to say to us, please?
We know you're going to take it day by day. We know you're going to see how your legs
Exactly.
feel, but we
And
don't want to hear that.
Your
thing.
team have been brilliant. We get that. Yeah. And,
Yeah. Tell us about the experience.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you're really yelling at one another when you're
yeah.
swapping off.
Yeah. Or the moment that you were most worried, or the time that it was most satisfying, or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, pro cycling. It's the thing that we love to hate or hate to love, or I don't know.
I love to love it.
Yeah.
I don't love to hate it. I don't hate it. I absolutely love it. And it will never stop. No sport could have put up with, no other sport could put up with as much as cycling has, pro cycling has,
That's true.
which shows how amazing it is. But God, come on.
Get with the times.
Yeah, I'm 50. By the time I'm 55 or 60, it's got to be better than this.
Yeah, that's funny. We've often referenced in past conversations your son. I know he has enormous difficulties day in, day out, and that it's been a real challenge to you. You've got 3 children, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
But now I've forgotten his name.
Oscar.
Oscar is quite special. Can you are you happy talking about that?
Yeah, of course.
Can you explain his condition and also what it means to you and how it's changed you as a person?
Yeah, well, Oscar has autism, has very severe autism, with severe learning difficulties as well. And he was diagnosed when he was 2, or just before he was 2, so he's now 21. So most of my adult life, and certainly the last 19 years, has been all about that experience, really. The autistic spectrum is a very broad spectrum. At one end is people with Asperger's and very mild autism who you may not even know, but who also find life difficult. At the other end of the spectrum are people who are non-verbal and often self-injurious and need the most intense care. Oscar's much closer to that extreme end. He's a lovely guy. He makes people feel good. He's very charismatic as a guy, but he's non-verbal, and he needs somebody with him all the time, 24 hours a day, at night as well, and 2 to 1 if he's outside. So he is one of the more vulnerable and challenging people in our society. So yeah, my job, or mine and my wife's job, and it's more my wife's job because I've been focusing on cycling for part of my life, has been focused on him and how you can make his life as fulfilling as possible and help him to learn, because he does learn very slowly and in very small increments of learning, but he gets huge satisfaction when he can do things, like we all do. And why shouldn't he be able to learn rather than just be thrown into some kind of institution where... so we're very ambitious about him, and we support a charity called Ambitious About Autism, who support people like him with education and schooling and college. So it's been pretty profound for me, and it affects my life in a number of ways. One is that I can very rarely ride at weekends. I obviously have to make every moment I'm at work count. Not that that's in my head every minute of every day, but it's behind everything is this sort of desire to make it really work, because he needs it, and I'm away from him, and there's also this, he's a guy with his own challenges. I can do so many things. Why shouldn't I do them? I must do them. There's no point sort of sitting back. I should go and do it because I can.
So it's made you a can-do person in every sense, but it's helped.
Yeah. And also, I think it gives you a different view of the world. It gives you, a more compassionate view of the world. I think my other 2 children have benefited from that.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. So yeah, we raise money for the charity, which if Rapha can do more to raise awareness of autism and money for autism charities, then that's what we should do.
Yeah. But just moving away from children, because I can talk about children and cycling for a very long time, but let's have a little chat about cycling fashion.
Yeah.
What's the next trend? You're a mover and shaker, you're dictating the way things. I've lost count of the number of people that have imitated the Rapha aesthetic and you know, tried to box things up nicely and package them well and present them in a way that becomes an object of desire. But it doesn't mean you've stopped doing what you've done.
When we started, it was most of our product was black, but I always felt we needed to have some kind of accent colour, because just relentlessly black is pretty hardcore. And it couldn't be yellow because that was too obvious. And pink was obviously the Giro, but also I like Paul Smith a lot, and Paul used to use a lot of pink, so I wore a lot of pink, so I thought a little bit of pink here and there. We've certainly embraced pink more in the last few years, and it's a useful high-vis colour. It stands out in a way that bright yellow doesn't stand out in, because there's so much bright yellow now out there in road workers' uniforms and what have you. Bright pink is still it's one that you can't really miss. So I think it's interesting being in Australia, because there's an explosion of interesting kits out there, and really stylish kits, and you know, great graphic design. There's more graphic designers working in cycling now than there have ever been, and I think maybe the sort of epicenter was Willunga Hill on Saturday, and that's brilliant, because there's some great looking stuff that you can enjoy wearing. I think some of that it's become quite leery, a lot of it, and I think some of that will pare back again, because fundamentally people want to wear stuff that makes them feel good and look good, and only some people look good in crazy patterns. So I think it'll tend back to a more restrained, elegant look, but it has to go through those cycles, doesn't it? And it's great that people actually can be more self-expressive. And the thing that worries me about it is that it's all happening over here, that we have all these lovely kits, but fundamentally there's still a lot of challenges in riding a bike, and kit can really help you, whether it's better fabrics for moisture management, or better waterproofing, or unique ways of layering, or different fits that add compression, there's so many things you can do to help a ride, and very few of those brands are actually trying to tackle that at all. They're just sort of saying, well, you have a jersey and nicks and you make them nice colours. Well, that doesn't really help the cyclist, it just looks good. So we will always push on the functional side as well. It's got to last for ideally 2 or 3 years, because this is expensive stuff, and I ride 4 times a week, 5 times a week, that would be good. For the pro, as long as it's brilliant for that 1 week period, worn in rotation, and it can be washed in incinerators that the hotels have, then that's great, because there's another one that can come after it, which took a while for us to get our heads around, and lots of the sort of comfort details that we put into product, and usability stuff, which makes sense for us as riders. The pros just don't need them at all, so you just take them out.
So in fact, the Rapha CC is a better testing ground than the Pro Peloton will ever be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the Rapha CC members have to wash their kit.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't have soigneurs.
You have to wash it and it has to dry overnight. So for example, this is a product push, but our brevet shorts have a chamois that's more dense. So it's dense because it gives more support, but it also dries much quicker. Because if you're washing your kit overnight, the last thing to dry is always your bib shorts, isn't it? Because it's got a great sponge in it that just sits full of water. So having those things, the pros don't worry about that, because it goes in a tumble dryer and on the bus, and then they've got another pair anyway.
We'll could keep talking, but let's push the red button and finish this one soon. What do you think?
Okay.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, Simon. Thanks for your time.
Very welcome. Same time next year.
Okay. Good stuff.
Cheers.